Hey everyone, welcome back to A Perspective. This is MJ speaking, and thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the podcast today. Thank you so much for coming back, you guys. I hope you're having a wonderful day, afternoon, evening, whatever time in the day it is for you as you are currently listening to this episode. It means the world that you continue coming back to tune in, and this interview was so profound. I am speaking with Marissa Hamon in this interview. She is a life coach and wellness advocate on Instagram, among many other things. And in this conversation, we dived into self love and how to align the person that you are inwards with the person that you are projecting outwards, and how to align those two beings into one. Again, among many other very profound things that were discussed in this episode. And I think it's pretty evident right off the bat just how much her story captivated me and how blown away I was by everything she was saying. So I hope it does the same for you, and make sure you're taking notes, because this conversation was just something else. And I think that you will too be blown away and will have so much to take away from it. So before we get into the episode, I do want to take a second to acknowledge that as an uninvited settler and a current inhabitant, I am currently recording this episode on the unceded traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, Stowlow, Quequitlam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations communities, whose relationship with the land stands to this day. And I want to express the immense gratitude that I feel for being able to live here and to bring you this episode from this beautiful land. And without further ado, let's welcome Marissa onto the podcast. Hi, Marissa. How's it going?
I'm so good. How are you, Marianne?
Good, thank you. I am very excited to have you here. How's your day going so far?
Good. It's full of adventures.
Yeah. I want to start the episode off on a really quick note. I just want to give you a little bit of a shout out for the people listening here. So Marissa is somebody that I've followed since I decided to hop on the wellness side of Instagram a couple months ago, and I'm honestly, I don't remember how I found you. I think you came up on my suggestion page, and I have been mesmerized and just blown away by all the content that you produce and you post on your Instagram, because you have a very eloquent, raw, and vulnerable way of communicating your feelings and what's going on in your life in a way that is very inviting. And I think you're very real about what you're feeling, why you're going through it, and just very encouraging about the fact that you should just embrace whatever is life is throwing at you in that moment. And I just I think to find somebody who is willing to share the pretty and not so pretty parts of life is so rare nowadays. So I appreciate you a lot and what you're doing on Instagram. It's really great. I just want to say, I hope you're not getting too emotional yet.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. So just before we get rolling on our conversation for today, which I'm very excited about, can I ask you to tell us your story real quick, just so that our listeners and myself included get a little bit of a better sense of who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do?
Yeah, for sure. It's really funny. I was literally thinking about this earlier today, because every time I go on a podcast, different parts of my story come up. And I was thinking, there's so many different layers to everyone's story. And also, right now, I'm in the middle of creating another story that 3 years down the road is going to be another story that I can share to help inspire people. So I'll share a little bit about my self-love story, and kind of how I've got to where I am now. And Perfect. I was raised in a small town around 2.5 hours west of Ottawa in Ontario, Canada. And I was raised in a family of 9 kids. I was homeschooled all through high school.
Wow.
We went to mass 4 or 5 days a week, and I was in this small conservative Catholic religious community, which looking back now it was a very repressive place. It did not encourage self-expression. It did not encourage self-love and self-pleasure and self-expression. It was very much follow these rules, do these things, and then you'll be a good person and you'll go to heaven. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
And through that whole experience of growing up with that, and then eventually when I was probably 18, 19 is when I officially left religion. But through that was this whole thing, as all of my worth had come from being the daughter of God based off of this religion, and from following these rules and from doing these things. So when I then left religion, I was like, well, who am I now? What's my worth? Like before I was lovable and a good person because I was a daughter of God. But then as soon as I was like, well, I don't believe this anymore, it was like I was worthless. So I was like, so even like, especially at that point, looking back now, like I really didn't love myself. And I'd learned very early, because sin is if you do something bad, and because I'm human, guess what, I'm going to sin. And even if you did something good, if you didn't do it as good as you could have, it was still like, that still isn't good enough. So I had grown up with almost this self-loathing of, you should have done better, Marissa. Oh, look, there, you're a sinner again. Oh, yeah, you're not a good person. It was like, that was the underlying tone of everything that I learned and I absorbed, because everything that we learn and absorb as kids isn't based necessarily off what we're taught and told. I was taught and told that God is love, but I learned I'm a worthless human being. I'm a sinner. I'm not good enough. I am bad. That's what I learned. So coming out of that then, and moving from small town, middle nowhere, where I didn't know anything, into the big world, that was a bit of a shock. And I really had to try to like find like, who is Marissa? And like, and how do I get through this? Well, how do I navigate this whole world and this life thing? And I realized that I got a lot of attention for my body and for being beautiful. So I said, you know what? I don't know what the purpose of life is, but one is I'm a human being. So I know I'm going to have to take care of my physical body because it's my vehicle for life. But also too, I was like, well, like people like me and I get attention. And if people are going to like me and stuff because of my body, I better make sure I know how to stay fit and sexy the rest of my life, because otherwise, why would anyone want me?
Yeah, totally.
So that's when I got into school, and I did fitness and health promotion for 2 years. And after that, I went and I worked as a personal trainer for 5 years. So the working in the fitness and health industry was cool for a couple different reasons. One is because I really got to learn a lot about how to take care of myself and love myself physically. But I also, over the years, learned how like, oh, I am so much more than just my body. People are gonna love me so much more for them just for this. And it was a ride. It was a ride of still trying to make everybody else happy by trying to look a certain way, but then also realizing, but I don't care about what people think about me. So then realizing, but then I still want to be a certain way and take care of my body just for me. And realizing like, and that was self-love. And through all this, I mean, I never was a casual dater. My first really long-term, like I had a long-term, I guess a year and a half. I had dated a fellow for a year and a half back when I was 18-ish. And then other than that, I hadn't seen anyone until I got into a relationship when I was in school for fitness and health. And then I was with that fellow for probably 3 years.
Wow.
And it was at the end of that relationship, while I was still in this fitness and health thing, still trying to make my body look a certain way to try to be loved, that I really came face to face with, I actually don't love myself, because I realized I thought I just had to do better. Same thing as growing up being that person who was always sinning, right? Like if I just do better, then I'll be good enough. So I was always trying to take the next steps, trying to be the best girlfriend, the best trainer, the best friend, the best version of myself that I could be. But from this place of, I feel like I'm not enough until I am these things, and I feel like I need to do better, rather than coming from this place if I already am enough and it just being an expression, and just from a place of love. And it was at the end of the relationship with my ex that I realized, through a series of things that just kind of hit me in the face, like, oh, this isn't actually what you want. This isn't the relationship that you want to be in. This isn't you actually loving yourself being in this relationship with this person. This is you just trying to be what you think you should be in order to be a good person. You're just trying to do what you think you should do in order to feel happy, loved, and get all the check marks. And coming out of that relationship, I thought I was like, oh, I guess I'm still broken. I got to fix myself. So I did a 12-week rebuilding relationship course, which was really cool because it was me, and I was 23 at the time, and probably 15-ish other people who are between the ages of like 40 and 60 who were either potentially going to be divorced or like in the middle of like going through a divorce with their partner.
Okay, so you're like, I feel pretty out of place here.
Yeah, but it was really cool because I was like, I know I'm doing this now, so I'm not going to have to do this work years down the road, right? I'm like, I'm doing it now at what I thought was just this break from my partner. I was like, I'm going to go into this thing. I'm doing this 12-week thing. I'm going to work on myself, make sure I'm better, and then I'll be good enough for him again, right? Still in that same place of I'm still not good, still not worthy. And it was through this 12 weeks that's when I really started to get these pieces of information of like, oh, actually, underneath, deep down, this isn't what I want. This is just what I think I should want. And so therefore I've been hiding my emotions. I've been hiding what I really want, all the things underneath. And I actually don't love myself. I've been trying to do all the right things and thinking that when I do it right and I do it good enough, then I'll be able to love myself because then I'll be good. Rather than realizing like, oh, I don't want that. And I can love myself right now exactly as I am. Beautiful, imperfect being because I'm enough. And through that process, it was beautiful. I went through that course and learned a ton about myself, learned a ton about relationships. And at the end of it, my relationship coach, she said, when you're done this, you have to go on a 3-week solo trip somewhere. So I went backpacking in Costa Rica for 3 weeks on my own, and I'd never done anything.
Oh, wow. Oh my God.
Terrifying.
Yeah, of course.
And that's really what I needed to like break through doing all the things for other people and following and saying, oh, I gotta hit this check mark and that check mark, and then I'll be good enough. It was like, oh, like that was really where I started doing things for myself. And it's also during those around 6 months where I went through that course and then taking the trip. And that was also when I started my Instagram. I was so scared to start Instagram and share because it was the same thing. I was like, what if I do it wrong?
Yeah.
What are people gonna think of me? And it's really cool because my self-love journey has been on Instagram since this was 4 and a bit years ago now. And it's been an adventure. But that was really where I first realized like I didn't love myself. I was living and trying to do all these things. And over the course of these past 4 years, tons of shifts have happened, from everything from like leaving the fitness industry and now shifting into life coaching because that's what I felt called to, right? It's been shifting in and out of binge eating from when I learned to respect and love my body, saying, oh, this is then when I don't have all these cravings and I'm not emotionally eating or binge eating or getting into these chemically addictive patterns from my brain just wanting food. When I love myself and I don't fall into that, right? You can also look back and say like, oh, and there's times when I did fall into that because I was scared to love myself, or I was scared to see all the deep inner pains, the things that were in me, and to express them and dive into them. And it's scary. Like even these past 6 months for me have been quite an adventure on a whole other level. And knowing like, oh yeah, that's right. Like I can feel the old parts of me sometimes come up where they're like, oh, that's right. You're not worthy. You're not lovable. Hide those parts of you. The world doesn't want to see that. But like you said at the beginning, you're like, I love to see the realness. And I think everybody, we all have that. We all have these little voices in our head, which are like, yeah, but you're not good enough or not lovable because these specific things about you, but people want this part of you, but not that. And there are going to be people who are only going to love you if you fit into a certain box. Right? But it's realizing like the goal isn't to try to get everyone else to love you. It's for you to love yourself. And loving yourself is a combination of seeing yourself for who you truly are and just embracing all of your being, but also it's self-love is also a verb. It's an action of saying, okay, how can I take those consistent actions daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, consistently to then actually support myself on that physical, mental, emotional, spiritual level. And that's what loving ourselves is.
Absolutely. Wow. I Oh my gosh, there's so much I want to unpack there, and I don't want to like get too far off topic. But first of all, thank you for everything that you shared with us right there. Um that was really touching, especially as somebody who I come from a Catholic family as well. Not wait, I didn't grow up in a Catholic neighborhood, like with a Catholic community, but I have like a family who's a little bit all over the place in terms of like their beliefs and like the extent of their beliefs. So I totally relate to you in that sense. And just to speak to your point real quick before I get into some questions, what you said there about the voices that we're all carrying in our heads that are talking negative to us, right? I think it's really unrealistic to think that we can fully tune them out with work, right? And I feel like all of us, when we follow people who pretend to, or like not pretend, but who show this like perfect side of them that's like always smiling and never down and stuff, we're looking to them to see how can we reach that level of like there's no negative talk, right? But in reality, that negative talk is the motivating force behind our self-growth and self-development, right? And if we chose to tune it out completely, I don't want to say there wouldn't be, I mean, I'm not saying that we should try to be competing with ourselves on a constant basis, but really you are, right? Because you're the only one that you have to stand up to, and you're the only person who you should be comparing yourself to, right? And that negative talk, as much as it can be like really hurtful and damaging sometimes if you don't learn to cope with it and regulate it, it's going to be your motivating force to keep better and to undo some of that taming that you have and that those beliefs that you have about yourself. So I love what you said there about that. One really quick thing I want to ask you before we get into our regular scheduled programming about self-love, what made you decide to leave your religious community when you were 18? That's a really young age to make that decision. And were you on your own? Like what motivated you to do that?
That's a whole other story. I'll give you the brief version of it. I tried to believe so hard.
Yeah.
And I 100% would have stayed if I believed it was real and I thought it was real. But that's something that I learned probably, I remember, I think it was probably somewhere between 12 and 14. I remember standing, looking in a mirror, wearing a skirt that went down to my knees because one of the rules for modesty in my family was you had to kneel down and your skirts had to touch the ground.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at my skirt in the mirror and pulling it up half an inch and being like, so immodest, and then pulling it down half an inch and then being like, and then that's modest. So
Yeah.
immodest, and looking at it and pulling it up that half an inch and being like, I don't think that's immodest. And that was the first time that then I realized it was like the only reason why is because my parents said, because that's how it is. So that's when I started to then question it. I'm very philosophical. I love to ask questions and learn and to think and to explore. And when I asked my parents, like, why? They're like, well, that's just how it is. So then I went, okay, but I don't agree with that. And that's when I started to then, my brain started to go, well, what else is there out there that you don't agree with, or maybe that you don't know about, or that you've just accepted as this is the truth simply because they've told you this is how it is. And that's when I started to say, like, well, I was just told that this is God and this is how it works. And I didn't know anything else. And it was over the course of the next 6-ish years. I mean, I was going to retreats all the time. I was doing all these things. I would go to these retreats with nuns and with priests and all these girls, and where we would do all the singing and all the prayers. And I, like, the amount of times I would sit in a church and just pray to God, help me believe. Just help me believe. I want so much to believe that you're real. And in the church, it was like, well, if you don't believe, it's either that you're not trying hard enough, right? Or it's that, like, it's just not your time yet, and that God's gonna keep it. That means you still got to keep trying, right? And that's the same thing that happened then in my relationship, right? Years down the road that I just told you about, is like, I kept thinking like, no, I just have to try harder and then this relationship will work. And it's the same thing that happened with me in the fitness industry. I just have to try harder and then I'll know that this career is for me. The same thing happened in religion. No, I just have to try harder and then I'll believe in God. It's not that maybe this isn't for me, it's that I'm not good enough. And it was years of, like I said, praying. I'd go to, like, later on, I went on a 2-week pilgrimage in Medjugorje. It was a place in over in Europe where, like, there was visions of Mother Mary. Like, I went there.
Okay.
I would go to seminaries. I had people pray over me. The amount of times I would ask people to pray for me. I went and spent 3 weeks living in a religious commune. And then at the end of it all, I ended up going and
Wow.
did a year studying at a Catholic university, specifically because I knew I didn't know if I believed or not, but I knew that if I was to die and go to the gates of heaven, that God would be like, you had that moment where you knew that you didn't know and you didn't keep looking. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to give it this year. And it was during that year of studies, one of the things we did is we studied the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and in there, there's the definition of faith is an act of the intellect assenting to the divine truth by conduct of the will moved by God through grace. I still remember it.
Wow.
And basically what that means is it means that faith, right, or you're believing that God is real, comes from, it's a gift from God, and your ability to mentally and intellectually say, yes, God is real, but it comes from God's grace. And that's when I started to give myself permission to say, I'm trying so hard. And if God hasn't given me the grace, it's not because I'm not trying. It's because he hasn't given me the grace yet. And it's one of those things, like, today, if something was to happen, if God was to suddenly give me the grace and belief, I would friggin' break up with my fiance, my girlfriend, and go back. Like, I would be all in. But I'm not going to live my entire life for this thing and follow all these rules.
No, of course not.
In the depths of my heart, it's like, well, that doesn't ring true. It's from a place of fear, not a place of love, right? The same thing for loving ourselves. Why would you do things for yourself from that place of fear or from self-hatred rather than from a place of love? Like, I don't want that relationship with a God that I don't even think is real, right? So
Absolutely.
it's been an adventure, and it's one of those things, like, still to this day, it affects me. It affects my ability to be able, like, my body shame, how, like, being able to wear the things I wear. And, like, a lot of the reason why different eating disorders and things have come around from my body is because it's terrified to be beautiful and be this strong, powerful, sexual, feminine being. Because I learned when I was young, like, no, now you're sending everybody to hell. So I think a lot of it still comes from that. And there's times where I'll look at myself and be like, oh, I'm either too much or I'm not enough. It'll keep going back to those. So it still happens, if not daily, weekly, where different thoughts about religion and the aftermath and the effects of it still affects me all the time. It affects my intimate relationship with my partner sometimes. Right? Like, there's my body will tighten up and go, no, you can't come near me because this is bad. This is a sin. How can I love another woman? Right? So it affects that. It affects my ability to be able to connect to God, source, universe, whatever else. Because then there's still part of me which is like, I don't know. I'm being a sinful witch person, right? It's like, rather than being like, it still affects us. It still affects me. And I know other people in that community who have come out or have found a lot more freedom and things have shifted, but it's not something which just changed overnight. I didn't just it was years, and still is years later. I'm still doing the healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And how have you started redefining what self-love is to you and what love is to you, right? Because I think I totally agree. Like, there's a very uniform way of believing as Catholics what love is and, like, what faith is and how to and living by the beliefs of quote unquote God, right? Because for all we know, a lot of the stuff written in the Bible, and this is my personal belief and I don't want to, like, instill it in anybody else, and I say this as a Catholic who is also recovering from my experience with faith, and I won't go too much into it, but when I was about 13 14 years old, I had to redefine what faith was to me and what God was to me. And I think that for me, it's very, very, very far outside what the preachers and the priests are preaching in the church. I think it comes down to the individual relationship that you have with the God, the being, whoever it is that you believe in, right? But it also takes untaming yourself from what you were traditionally taught to believe is what you should do, how you should act, what you should believe in as a practicing religious person. So how did you kind of, if you did, redefine your system of beliefs, and how did you, because you said you are your fiance Kathleen is a woman, right? And obviously, like, we know, not the most widely accepted in a lot of Catholic families. How did you reinvent your system of beliefs and values after you stepped away from the church?
It still is a process. It still is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been like when I first left the church, it was like, nope, no God, nothing. Nope, it's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I labeled myself as agnostic for a while, being like, maybe God is, maybe isn't, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. Right now, not even open to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've gotten to a place where I really know and believe that there is that something, whatever you want to call it. You can call it God, you can call it source, you can call it universe, you can call it love.
Mm-hmm.
But that thing, I really believe that there is that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And every day it's like I'm slowly building up a new relationship with it. Like you said, like there's people who are in the church for all these rules and to preach the fear and all those things. There's also, I have some friends who are in church who are all about love, and it's so beautiful. And I'm not anti religion. It's more that I'm anti people falling in love with religion rather than falling in love with God. Yeah. And religion is just a title. It's another label. But when we look into it, like, I really believe that everyone in any religion who is in the religion for the love of God is everyone's loving the same person. It's all the same thing. That's the same. It's all the same. It's all love. It's all God. It's all source. It's all universe. We just have different relationships and different understandings of it. Yeah. And but it's the people who are in it for the sake of love rather than for the sake of fear and for following the rules and trying to control everything. That's when you have the most beautiful relationship. But with beliefs, and this is what's actually really cool, is because of being able to shift my beliefs around religion, that's also what helped me shift my beliefs around myself being lovable and being worthy of love, because beliefs are all the same thing. Beliefs are simply statements that we have come to accept as true. So if something is true to us, then that's something that is true because we believe it, right? Some people still believe the world is flat, right? And that's fine, because it's like, is that going to affect me? Is that like, maybe no, right? But it's like, you're not defined based off of your beliefs. We choose to define ourselves based off of our beliefs. Yeah. You're not a good or a bad person because you believe that the world is round or flat. It's just saying, like, okay, like, these are beliefs, and then how can we change these? Because what I've really come to realize is there's really two parts to changing beliefs. There's changing beliefs on an intellectual level, and then there's changing your beliefs on a physical level. Because there might be something that mentally isn't the truth, but your body still doesn't believe it. And vice versa. There might be something that is fine, like your body has no problem with it, but your brain keeps running in circles and circles, right? So if we take the example of I am enough, what you can do, and for anyone listening, is sit yourself in front of a mirror and say, I am enough. And you will feel in your body whether or not you believe that to be true. Wow. You will feel it. Your body will tell you, is this a yes or is it a no? And so when it comes to changing beliefs, that's a great way that you can then start to, like, check in and say, like, oh yeah, I can tell if this is a yes or no. It's just asking yourself in the mirror. But how you change it is a combination of using logic to help change the mind and the thoughts, and then using experiences to help shift the body. Because that's how we learn. Everything we know to be true and believe now is because of things we've either been taught, so more knowledge, or we've experienced. So then we've taken that to be the truth, right? If you were a kid and you fell off of a chair and hurt your head or whatever, that experience is going to make your body afraid to stand on the chairs later on. Yeah. Intellectually, you might know, I'm fine to stand on this chair now, but your body might not think that. Or vice versa, you can think intellectually, that's a really tall bar stool, which is not stable. I really shouldn't go stand on that. So it's like a belief your mind has, but your body might be like, yeah, whatever. So if I'm going to fall, I'm not going to fall that far. It's not the end of the world. Right. So there's a difference between your mind and your body, but when you can really learn to be attentive of what's going on in both, and then really work on shifting your beliefs from both sides, that's when the magic happens. Because you can tell yourself all day in your head and know I am enough up here, but if you don't actually believe it in your heart and in your being, you're never gonna feel it. So that's why things like affirmations, they can work if you believe that you're worthy and you're good enough and you're lovable. But if you don't believe it, then often just saying the same thing again and again won't actually get you there. Because yes, our thoughts do create our beliefs, but also our beliefs create our thoughts. So just because you're consciously saying, I am lovable, if the unconscious programming is still running, I'm not lovable, it's not going to happen. So you change these, like I said, logical process for the mind. So literally going through and trying to give yourself evidence why this is the truth, right? Am I lovable? If I say I'm not, okay, well then why? Why is it that I'm not lovable? How do I know this is the truth? Start asking yourself that. How do I know this is the truth? And if you're like, well, because everyone keeps breaking up with me, right? Well, because my family still thinks I'm not good enough. Well, because I didn't graduate top of my class, or I keep failing school, whatever it is, whatever that story is, you say, okay. And like, when did I learn this? Who did I learn this from? Who says that failing a class, or that not being able to fit into a certain dress size, or not having a certain career path, or not being in a relationship, who decided that means that I'm not lovable? Oh, interesting. I decided that. Oh, interesting. And how did I do that? Oh, because I learned it when I was younger, or because I read it somewhere, or because I observed this. So when we start to question these things and say, is this the truth? Like, really, is it the truth? How do I know this is to be the truth? That's when you'll be able to start to shift things on that mental level. And if you go through all that and you still have this deep intellectual space of, I still don't think I'm good enough, I still don't think I'm lovable, I still don't think I'm worthy of this, that's when you can then start to say, okay, if there was possibly a different truth, what might then that be? Because what's the opposite of I'm not lovable is I'm lovable. But is it possible that maybe I'm lovable even if I'm failing? Even if I just got dumped? Even if I'm sick, and even if I'm not running the top of my business or my career or whatever else, the things I'm working on, is it still possible that I'm still lovable? And then just opening up your mind to the possibility, that's how you can then start to bring things into step. So like that's the mental side. And like I said, going back to logic with religion, that definition of faith, I logically had to feel safe enough to be able to leave religion when I then believed up here, but there was still, my body was still freaking out. The first day I didn't go to mass here in Ottawa, I remember sitting on the couch, like shaking, being so restless, because my body, even though my brain knew that this is okay for me to not go, my body was freaking out. It was like, you're going to go to fucking hell if you don't get your ass up right now. Right? And my brain was like, yeah, but God knows that I'm really trying. God knows, God would give me grace. God would help me through this, because if God was a loving God, then it's like my logical brain knew it. And I believed it up here, but my body was still freaking out. And it's going to be the same thing with the self-love stuff, right? You can work through it mentally up here, but if your body still is freaking out, going, no, you're still not lovable, that's when you then have to start to give it experiences. And that's how the body learns, through experiences. So it's by allowing yourself to receive love. Because when we believe we're not worthy, we're going to perpetuate that story by blocking it all out. We're going to perpetuate our suffering. We're going to say, see, told you you're not lovable. Yeah, that person dumped you. And then we dive into it a little bit more and we realize, like, oh, interesting. I totally self-sabotaged that relationship. Right? Or I'd gotten into one that I knew underneath from the get-go wasn't right for me. So that way I could prove to myself when it fell apart that, oh, see, I told you, you're not lovable. Right? So then when it comes to, like I said, when it comes to changing your beliefs on that physical level, like giving your body that, it's just through the experiences. And if it's too scary to go out and get the experiences in the real world, then what we can do is we can do it through meditation, because we can visualize those things happening, right? If I can't actually go out and find someone, a partner who is going to love me and cherish me and hold me exactly for who I am, maybe because they've got their own wounds and other things, that's fine. I can sit down and visualize it because my body doesn't know the difference between it actually happening and only happening in my mind. And when you start then bringing that to your mind, that's when your body will calm down. That's when the body will relax. Because otherwise, like I said, the body was just trying to keep me safe. It was freaking out because it was like, it honestly thought I was going to be burning in hell for all of eternity. So it's a good thing that it was freaking out. It was just trying to keep me safe. That's all the body's doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when it comes to shifting beliefs about anything, it's looking at it on both sides. How can I give myself the experiences, and then also, so it's like my body learns, but also then that thought process and using that logic to help shift the mind space.
I love redefining. The way that you just redefined belief for me was making sure that your mind and your body are meet in the same place, right? I don't think I've ever heard that before. That's really cool, and I hope that the people listening are like took that all in, because I'm I'm blown away. Thank you for sharing that. And like, even as you were saying that, I was thinking about so many examples in my own day where that happens, right? Like, you tell yourself a thought. I have like a sticky note of affirmations on my mirror that I'm trying really hard to tell myself, but I feel like now you saying that, the reason why I avoid them is because my body like reacts as soon as I say them, right? And that was huge. I'm speechless. Thank you for that. I want to get into the self-love stuff, as much as I wish I could unpack that even more, because I know that's what we came here to do. So I want to ask you about your would you say that, actually, first, would you say that your relationship with your ex of 3 years, was that kind of like what got the ball rolling for your self-love journey, or what was like the starting line, do you think?
Yeah, it was definitely, that was the big one. That was my big wake up call, was being like, oh, I don't believe I'm good enough for this relationship. I need to go fix myself. And that was really my big, like, oh, I'm not good enough. But like I said, then through that process of doing that relationship rebuilding course, that's really where I started to realize, like, oh, I actually haven't been loving myself. I've been trying to love everybody else and getting them to love me instead of me loving me. Oh,
Totally. So when you took that trip to Costa Rica after that relationship course, and you were all by yourself, what things about you did you come to face with that were good and maybe you didn't like so much?
I had to come face to face with being alone. Because when you don't love yourself and you realize that, that's painful.
And
it's a lot easier to just pretend everything's good, and and be like, no, I feel good enough, and I'm a good enough person because I've done all these things and whatever else. Same thing intellectually, but deep down that feeling, I didn't believe it. And when you start to then be by yourself and you be alone, or when you look in the mirror, you ask yourself, you say that affirmation, and you feel in your body, I don't believe that, or I don't feel safe, or this isn't, that's when we're like, oh, interesting. There's a lot more underneath there than I realized. So learning to be alone and to not be in constant service and caring for others and fixing things for others, which is where I got a lot of my value from, and realizing, oh, people are still going to want to hang out with me, even if I'm not giving them something, even if I'm not doing something for them, even if I'm not this perfect person following all these perfect routines, and like, oh, people are going to just love me. And also, there's people who are going to not love me regardless of how amazing I am. And that's okay too. Absolutely. And they'll be like, the point isn't to get everybody else to love you and try to be something to get others to love you, regardless of whether it's trying to be more or trying to be less, so that way people will love and accept you. It's just be you. And that's really where I started to learn, like, oh, I can be alone, and it can be scary, and I can, this is also where I started to realize, like, oh, like, and I can love who I want to love. Like I can, like, I start thinking more about like my now partner, my now fiance back home, being like, oh, like I can love whoever I want, not because of what society or other people tell us like this is what you should do, but like, oh, that's really cool. I also I learned the massive value of surrendering to the unknown, because when I booked this trip, I had my flight in, I had my flight out, I had where I was going to sleep the first night, and nothing else I had booked or planned.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm a massive planner. I'm a control freak.
Yeah.
I literally earlier today I posted about how these past couple months I've been trying to step more, and I'm learning to step more into my feminine and masculine. But I'm used to being in control, having everything follow a schedule, know that everything's follows this plan, and I'm used to that.
Yeah.
And that was the first time on this trip when I let that go. And I surrendered to him, like, I'm going to just receive whatever the adventures are that come. And that was so amazing, because if I had controlled every little thing, even now, if I keep trying to control every little thing, you run into so much resistance.
Yeah.
And not because I'm not doing enough, but because I'm trying to still control it all. It's like I need to just let go and just be able to enjoy the ride. And that's also where then that self-love comes in, is realizing I don't have to fit my schedule, I don't have to fit my body, I don't have to fit my likes or dislikes into any box. It's like you can just be like, what do I want? What nurtures me? How can I literally, like, how can I just be me and live from this place of expression, trust the flow, let go of all the controlledness and all the trying to do it the right way, and just be like, what feels right to me?
Yeah.
What feels right? And like that deep sense and peace you're going to get in your body, you'll know when it feels right. Because like when you sit there in front of the mirror and you say to yourself, I love you, and you feel in your body, it's like, nope. You know that that's not a no, because it's not the truth, and because you're like, oh, it's actually just something I have to accept. You're like, no, it doesn't feel right, because I know that something needs to shift. And then when you get to the place where you sit in the mirror and you look at yourself and you say, I love you, and you feel that deep, immense calm and peace in your being, that's when you're like, oh yeah, I'm exactly what I need to be. But it's such a journey, such a journey.
Totally. When do you recall the first moment or the first time where you told yourself I love you and you believed it, what that was like, or when that was?
I can remember one moment for sure. And this was probably around 3 years ago now. And it's the first time I had ever, it was in a safe space with people I really trusted, and we did Molly, and it was in this container of love. And the whole idea with doing this, it wasn't like, let's do this and like just go have a crazy party. It was literally like, this is this beautiful safe container. And all I wanted to do all night was dance for myself in front of the mirror. And that was the first time I was able to look at myself with unconditional love. And I could see all of me, and it was so beautiful. It was, and this, I'm not telling everyone now, go out and do Molly and dance for yourself. You have to love yourself. That's not how this works. I had to, the amount of work I had done before that, for years of taking care of myself, of doing the journaling, of seeing therapists, of having people hold me, of holding myself. I had done so much, but that was the first time I was able to let, like, all those voices we talked about in our head, that was the first time they were all gone, not the smallest little bit of them there. So yes, I'm sure the chemicals and the drugs help with that, right? But that's not something that you can't achieve. And I've experienced it now way more often and way more powerful on no substances, because of really doing the work.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, but that was the first time. And I literally have in my journal right up there. Like, I don't remember exactly what it says, but I remember what I wrote in my journal is, it says, "Do you remember last night? The way your eyes sparkled in the light, the way you danced for yourself in front of the mirror." Like,
Yeah.
that was the first time I was able to love all of me, including my body. Because before that, I was able to really love me, but there was still that thing about, my body's bad. My body's the sinful thing. My body is, it's like this part of me which should be rejected rather than embraced.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah, that was that first moment that full unconditional love is coming. And there's been so many more since then. But it's, yeah, it's pretty special.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I think that when you can get to that moment where you feel that it's so deep. I think I've also experienced it a few times myself, and it's, you start craving it more, right? Like, and you look to like anywhere and everywhere to get it, but it's so beautiful to know that you got it from yourself and it came from nowhere else, right? Because I think that one of the reasons why we are so fearful of being alone is because the thoughts in our head, right? We know we do everything possible to distract ourselves because we know that eventually we have to come home to ourselves, right? And if there's a discrepancy between the person in here and the person that we are relaying to other people, which is nice, is kind, is loving, is all these good traits that we don't reflect in ourselves, it doesn't feel good to know that you don't even have your own back, right? And it's really discomforting. And I think when you can feel, when you have that moment, especially you have that moment with the knowing that you've put in the work to get here, right? It's like working towards a long goal and finally achieving it, and you're like, I created this, right? But you get to turn that into, I created me and this love that I have for myself now. So that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that, and proud obviously, that after all those years of work and everything you went through, you're at this stage now where you can look at yourself and say, even if it's not every day and even if you don't feel it in every single moment, like, you still know that it's there somewhere. You just have to kind of go back to the basics and figure out what got you there in the first place so you can get in touch with that feeling again. So
Yeah, that's like you said there, like, you just nailed it when you said you've got to go back to those basics and be like, what is it that helped me get in touch with that again? Because that's so huge. And it's like these past like 6 months for me, I've been going through a lot of shit. And it's like you said, like, there's some days where it's there and some days it's not. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, like, these past couple months, it's been more on the side of where I'll wake up, I go to look at myself in the mirror and be like, you're lovable. And I'm like, I'm not even gonna say it to myself because I know I don't believe it, but I don't remember how to get back there. It's just too painful to deal with. And I don't want to, it's like, okay, Marissa, it's like, how can you go back to the basics? Right. Oh, that's right. Like, oh, and underneath all that, it's just that there's pain. And it's just that we just don't want to feel the pain of that reality of realizing, like, I don't love myself. Like, think about your partner or your parent, that feeling of your partner or your parent not loving you. Imagine it from yourself. When you look in the mirror, you say, I love you, and you realize you don't. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. And it's not something you can just say, I love you, and then that's how it is. It's like, no. Like, you have to show it. And you have to nurture this relationship with yourself. But it's like those joyful moments, like you said, where you're fully in love with yourself. This is something I do all the time, and I highly recommend you do as well. Is all those love songs you hear on the radio, sing them to yourself. And if you sing them, and if you, like, it's the same thing as the mirror. If you sing it and if you feel like that's not quite for you, then it's like, oh, it's because I need to love myself more. And then it's just asking yourself, like, how do you want to be loved? It's the same way if you've got kids, or if you had a kid, how would you love them? Right? Oh, you can say you love them, but if you're not actually nurturing them and taking care of them, like, it's harder. And like, there's so many different people's work I've studied over the years that have been helpful, but like Dr. Nicola Parrish talks about,
oh my gosh,
parenting yourself.
Yeah.
She's got amazing work, right? Same thing, Dr. Joe
I've spoken about
Dispenza.
her frequently on here. I'm a huge fan of her work.
Yeah,
She's great. She's
so
great.
Awesome. But like Dr. Joe Dispenza, the same thing. Like he has these
Yeah.
processes for shifting your beliefs. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much amazing information there. And then like you go into James Clear with Atomic Habits and like how can I build up habits that nurture and love and support me? Not because I want to follow the rules and look good from the outside, but because how can I express myself just by being this person who naturally takes care of me? Because when we're ourselves, that's what self-love is.
Yeah.
And I think something else which is so important, I think you maybe touched on it, but I don't know if you actually went there, was that like you have to be your true self. You can't be having like this, you can't be, you mentioned this, like you can't be showing one person out there that's a different person of who you truly are. Because if you're being someone who you're not, even if you love that person that you're being 100%, it's not the real you. So you're still not able to love yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and that's hard too. And really like, oh, I'm like, and how do we navigate this whole thing where like, how can I realize I don't love myself, which is super painful, and then go through that grieving and realize just because I don't love myself doesn't mean that I'm not a good person. Doesn't mean I can't get
Absolutely. I love what you said there, and I think it parallels a lot with this one thing I saw just this morning about you can be happy with the person that you are and still want to change, right? And I think like there's a lot of conflicting thoughts in the media right now about and I think this applies more to kind of like the body positivity movement. And I know that like a lot of women are getting lashback for working out to like try to hit a certain weight or like try to look a certain way, and then people are like, well, aren't you supposed to be promoting body positivity? Like, doesn't that mean like fully accepting yourself? And yeah, like it does, but there's no harm in wanting to better yourself to whatever that means for you, right? And I think it's so important that we recognize that and see that you can be happy where you are and you can honor yourself where you are and you can honor the process that you are taking and still want to get better, right? So I love what you said there, and I think that it paralleled beautifully with that idea. I know I don't want us to go too over time, so I do have a couple more questions for you. How does self-love play into relationships? So when I can't fathom personally what the transition must have been like for you to coming out of a Catholic family, start dating a woman, right? But I honor it a lot because what you just spoke about being your most authentic self and paralleling the person that you are with the person that you are inwards, right? And I think that you choosing to make your external internal versions of yourself one by going forth and dating Kathleen, like that's beautiful. And like to me that's like the most, like the best example of being authentic and loving yourself enough to do that despite what everybody else tells you should do. So when you made that decision and started dating Kathleen, how did self-love and or self-loathing come into your relationship? And do you think that if you don't have self-love, can you be in a successful relationship?
Nobody can love you as much as you can love yourself. And you, doesn't matter how much somebody else loves you, if you don't love yourself, you won't be able to receive their love. So it's one of those things that you really have to start with yourself. And you have to then enter this relationship rather than from a place of, I need someone else to fill me, which, like I said, with my looking back, that's exactly what it was. Is I was looking for all these perfect things and to hit all these check marks. And like, if I do this, then I'll be whole, then I'll be good enough. Rather than realizing I'm good enough and I'm loved as I am. And now I can enter wholly into a relationship. There's something I say all the time is like, you know, like there's like the saying like, oh, like they're my better half, right? I call Kathleen my other whole because she's a whole being on herself and I'm a whole being in myself.
Totally.
And from that place, then we're able to come into a relationship. And when we first got into a relationship, Kathleen and I was a fucking firework of love and passion for myself. I had so much love. Like it was, like I said, I'd done this this rebuilding relationship work, and then I had gone to Costa Rica, and then I was connected to myself. I was honoring my body. I was giving myself what I needed. I worked through old behaviors and thought patterns. I wouldn't let these other things come up anymore. I had drawn these beautiful boundaries around myself with my religious community that I'd left. It was beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then when I got into relationship, that's when, for the first bit, it was great. It was awesome. And still is, right? It's been up and down, but that's when I went back to much more codependent relationship behaviors because that's what was familiar to me. And that's the thing with relationships is it's like the thing, like you're going to marry your mother or your father, right? Like it's those primal relationships that we have. Yeah. Those we learned when we were young. That's who we're literally going to be attracted to, or what we try to bring out in people. And so it's because Kathleen and I, we were both in such amazing places when we first got together. Like, she's not my quote unquote type because she has emotional availability for me. Mm-hmm. She's not going to just be quiet and tell me like, oh no, like you're okay. Like, she'll call me out on my shit. Like when I picked her and I was attracted to her, it was because I was on that next level of so much in love with myself that I naturally attracted and ended up with a partner who was also so in love with themselves, and that it was just so beautiful. And then once I got into it, I started to go, this is amazing, but it feels uncomfortable because I'm used to dysfunctional relationships, so I'm going to try to make it dysfunctional again, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's okay. I'm human. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with the self-love thing. I'm used to being in a relationship with myself where I tell myself I'm not good enough, where I tell myself I'm not worthy. So rebuilding this relationship of self-love takes work. It's building a new habit. It's new thought patterns. It's all those things. And so, like, I mean, when you look at us as human beings, we're wired for what feels safe and familiar. So whatever you learned over the course of your life, especially from like your young years, from like 0 all the way up to 15, like those relationships, those behaviors, what you learned was, this is how I receive love. This is how I get attention. This is what feels normal to me. Your normal is what feels safe to your body. Yeah. And so same thing in relationships, it's going to try to find what feels normal or safe to you, even if it's super dysfunctional. And same thing with your relationship with yourself. It's going to want to go back to the way it was before because it would prefer to know exactly how it's going to be and it be familiar rather than actually feel good. So it's going to take work. But all that to say, you do have to love yourself in order to sustain a long-term successful relationship.
Absolutely. I totally agree. One question that I want to pull from what you said there is, so I'm someone who on a good day will take criticism well, but on a bad day when I'm not feeling so good with myself, I'll listen to the criticism with the same kind of approach that I listen to my negative self-talk, right? So like if somebody tells me, you could be better at this, on a bad day, I'll say like, okay, well, they're actually telling you suck at this, right? So like for you, when Kathleen was straight up with you about things that you needed to fix, or was just honest with you about whatever, how did you look at it from a lens of, she loves me and she's communicating with me and she wants me to be better, instead of saying she hates me, she wants to change who I am, etc.?
Takes work, takes practice, and there's still days where I'll go into the spiral of, oh, I'm just not good enough. Oh, told you, Marissa. See, there, it's another piece of evidence to say that you need to do better and all those things. But it's not about being perfect. It's about, like you said, you're going to have your days. It's about like saying, how fast can you observe that and notice, oh, look, that's my old self-talk coming back again. And rather than pretending it doesn't happen or resisting it or telling yourself, oh, I'm bad because it happened, but just fully embrace it with love and be like, oh yeah, and you're just a human being who's got its pains and its other stories and everything that's going on inside. And that's okay. And now moving forward, we're going to remember, like, what's the truth? Oh, that's right. The truth is I have this story, or I have this pain point inside, which is bringing up my brain running in circles. But the actual truth is that that's all that it is. It's just a story. It's just a thought. But there's Oh, there's times I'll get so triggered. It's funny. One of Kathleen's she'll say, she's like, "You're so much fun to push your buttons." I'm like, "Thanks," because
I don't know if it's a compliment or an insult, but thank you.
yeah. But so it's one of those things, like, and it's also like I'll freak out and I'll and I'll say something nasty back, or I'll shut down or whatever else.
Yeah.
But then there's the times where I can be like, "Oh, that's right. She loves me." Because as long as I can go back to that and be like, "I love me. She loves herself. She loves me. I love her." That's right. What's the truth about this whole situation? The truth is that. Start with that love. And then from there, it makes it so much easier to then honestly look at the feedback that she's giving me, because I'll know, even though it means that, yeah, maybe I'm not taking responsibility, or I've dropped the ball here, or I'm being selfish, or whatever else has come up, it doesn't mean that she doesn't love me. Because at the end of the day, that's all we want, is we want to be safe and we want to be loved. And if we feel like those are at jeopardy, that's when we freak out.
Yeah.
As long as you go back to know, like, oh, I am safe and I am loved. Cool.
Yeah, good. That's all good. I love that. That's huge. I totally agree. I feel like as soon as those are put in jeopardy, or we feel like we're not receiving it, is when we are most prone to falling into argument or saying something irrational and doing things that we would regret later, right? So I love, again, the idea of going back to the fundamentals to reassure yourself that you are in a safe space where you can be you and like express yourself. So I love that. That comes to the end of our questions. However, well, first let me just say thank you for everything, all the knowledge you dropped, because I am blown away, and will definitely be applying a lot of that to my own life. And I hope that for the people who are listening, you took it all in and you wrote it down and are prepared to apply it to your own life too, because I think that you showed us perfectly how, this self-love journey isn't easy, and you have to be willing to have difficult conversations with yourself, and you have to be prepared to be alone and to face the fact that really you are alone in life, right? Which is, again, an all the more reason to develop a healthy and loving relationship with yourself. So thank you for all that knowledge you dropped. That was incredible. Before I let you go, one thing I do with guests is I do a 3-question speed round, but I've decided to switch up the questions a little bit. So I think I asked 3, and the first 2 will be uniform across everybody, but the third one I'm going to switch. So my first speed round question for you is, what is your favorite quote?
There's so many. The one I'm going to go with today is, if you're living in the past, you're depressed. If you're living in the future, you're anxious. If you're living in the present, you're at peace.
I love that. I completely agree. The second question I've got for you is, what song is currently stuck in your head?
Oh, Big Plans. I got real big plans, baby.
I don't think I've heard that song. Who sings that?
I sing it to myself, and this is like, we were talking before about singing songs. I sing the song to myself, and whenever I do, like, I get emotional, and it's like, so it's literally like, I've got big plans for you. I've got big plans.
Oh, who sings that song? I don't think I've ever heard that song before.
Remember, I'll send it to you though.
Beautiful. Everybody search up Big Plans. If everybody wants an uplifting song, play Big Plans, and that's great. I love that. Last question is, what is something that people often get wrong about you?
That I figured out the whole self-love thing. Because I help coach people on this, and that I've been doing it for so long, and like, part of me also, like, that's a huge fear that I have too, is to tell people, like, guys, I'm still figuring this shit out. Like, I have so many days where I don't love myself, and how scary is that? Because, like, I mean, like, that's half my business, is like, if I tell people, like, hey, I actually don't have this thing figured out, like, who would want to come and work with me? Right? It's like, what, like, at what point, like, how can I, like, guys, like, I'm still figuring this out. I'm learning to love myself, and I've fallen in love with myself. And then something happens in life and it throws you off the rails.
Exactly.
And then you're like, oh, okay, I don't love myself because old stories come back up, because stuff. And it's like, and then you got to relearn it again.
Yeah.
And this self-love journey, it's not something you're going to do once. and you have it figured out, it's not a one and done. Because life is always changing and always evolving, and you're going to fall in love with yourself by doing the work, and then you're going to have rocky months. And you're going to fall out of love with yourself, or you're going to neglect your relationship, or something's going to happen that's going to throw you a curveball.
Yeah.
Like I don't have this shit all figured out, and I know I never will. But that's how life goes.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And knowing
Absolutely.
that I can still love myself even though I don't always love myself.
Exactly. And I think that the bravest thing you can do, and also one of the most self-loving things you can do, is admit to the people who are looking to you for guidance. Like, I may be trying to lead you, or I may be trying to help you, but I'm also going through this right along when you are, right? And you know, if people choose to look at that as like an accountability thing and say, okay, well, clearly you're not good enough for this, that's their problem, obviously. But I think you'll find that the majority of people actually thank you for your honesty. And it's comforting to know that even the people that they look up to for guidance and for inspiration are going through the same stuff that they are. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was an absolute joy of an interview. And thank you for all the knowledge you dropped. I hope that everybody listening took that all in and is going to apply it to their lives. And I can't wait to continue being in touch with you. This was awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And if you guys want to keep in touch with me, or if you guys want to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram. It's Marissa.Hamon. And I also have a free 7-day self-love challenge that you guys might have fun doing, where I literally go through like steps to how to love yourself on a body, mind, and soul level. So highly recommend, if you're like, how do I start to love myself more? How do I fall in love with myself and take care of myself? Go check that out. It's on my website. So yeah.
I will definitely be hopping on that train right after this interview. So thank you. And I will also link that in the podcast description for anybody interested in joining. Thank you so much, Marissa. I will see you soon. Thank you so much for tuning in, you guys. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that you were just as blown away as I was by everything that Marissa had to say. Don't forget to check out her Instagram. It will be linked in the podcast description, and to hop on that self-love challenge. I hope you love it as much as I have been loving it since recording this episode. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at aperspective.bymjpodcast so that you don't miss out on future updates on upcoming episodes. And if you want to contact me about getting on the show or something that you want mentioned on the show in the future as a future topic, don't hesitate to email me either. That will also be linked in the podcast description. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in again, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.